Good evening, friends and students and peers and colleagues and guests. It's great to see you here. Thank you so much for coming out this evening to this event. Additivism, Critical Approaches to 3D Printing. My name is Golan Levin, and I'm the director of the space that you're currently in. This is the Frank-Ratchye Studio for Creative Inquiry. It's the research lab here of the College of Fine Arts at Carnegie Mellon University. And its mission is to support atypical, anti-disciplinary, and interinstitutional research and outreach at the intersection of art, science, technology, and culture. It's my great pleasure that for tonight's event, we're partnering with the VIA Festival, a truly slamming and truly innovative and pioneering festival of new music and culture here in Pittsburgh. There's very few things like it in the United States, and only a handful of things like it abroad as well. It's a really special event and a great opportunity for us to partner with interesting cultural producers. And that's directed by Lauren Gashinsky, who also is in the School of Art. And tonight we're thrilled to basically have we're thrilled to have the Additivists. These are Morehshin Allahyari and Daniel Rourke. They've come from a long distance away to join us here this evening. They are examining 3D printing, stereolithography, and other forms of additive manufacture and additive prototyping, in particular, experimental cultural applications of these things and what it means to use them critically, what you would say are critical making approaches to using these things. How can these things shed light on who we are and who we are yet to be, and for better or for worse? So before I hand it off to Lauren to introduce them further, I'd like to just say, I want to say thank you to the sponsors of our event tonight. We have had funding from our endowment, the Frank-Ratchye Fund for Arts at the Frontier, to support tonight, as well as funds from the College of Engineering, from the College of Fine Arts, and from the ID8 network of design arts and technology across Carnegie Mellon. With that, I'd like to hand it off to Lauren Gashinsky, director of the VIA Festival, who will introduce Morehshin and Daniel further.
Yay. Thanks, Golan. All right, so you know who I am. My name is Lauren Gashinsky, and I am the co-director of the VIA Festival, artistic director, and I'm also staff in the School of Art. I'd like to tell you a little bit about VIA and then give a little bit more of an intro, and then we'll get into it. So you are officially kicking off the 2015 VIA Festival, so thanks for doing that. Yep, thanks for being here. If you got these under your butts, on your seats, you got these two flyers. There's just a general one. It's got some nice names on the back, some information. You can go to our website and see everything that's going on for the next 10 days. And then there is a really cute one, light blue, that's for this weekend. This year, VIA is spanning 2 weekends. And this first weekend, we're going to do a block party at Spirit. It's a big day, a lot of Pittsburgh, and also a lot of artists that are not from Pittsburgh. So please come by and check it out. If you or your friends have little ones under 18, you can bring them. You don't have to pay for them. Kids free until 9 or 10 o'clock at night. So feel free to have them come over too. So a little bit about VIA. We started in 2010 with the help of a Sprout Seed Award. And VIA, in my mind, is just a platform for emerging musicians and new media artists. We work with partners large and small throughout Pittsburgh to offer a week's worth of programming, and also throughout the year we do some special commission projects. We like to say that VIA is where the gallery meets the club, both curatorially and also literally where you can find us. So this year, again, we're doing events at CMU in the studio. You can find us at a new venue that just opened up in Lawrenceville called Spirit. We'll be at the Unblurred Gallery Crawl, and you can also find us at some semi-secret after-hours clubs. Though VIA is mostly known for its audiovisual showcases, every year we work to make sure that there's a healthy dose of lectures and workshops, like the ones you're sitting in. Last year we did a music conference with Ableton right here in the studio, and this year our educational component, as Golan's introduced, is focused around 2 artists who are leading the charge in radical practices around 3D printing. Thanks again to Golan and the studio for making this possible. And a little bit about Morehshin and Daniel. Morehshin and Daniel invite artists, engineers, scientists, activists, and basically people from any background to explore radical practices around a technology filled with hope and promise, the 3D printer. This lecture and workshop aim to disrupt binary thinking entirely, drawing together makers and thinkers invested in the idea of real change. Additivism, which I still can't pronounce, is a movement that aims to disrupt material, social, computational, and metaphysical realities through provocation, collaboration, and the weird. Morehshin is joining us from San Francisco by way of Iran and many cities in between. She's recently a resident at Pier 9 Autodesk, where she worked on a series called Material Speculation ISIS, which reconstructs artifacts currently being destroyed by ISIS. And she's been part of many exhibitions, festivals, and workshops around the world. And Danielle, who joins us from London, is currently pursuing a PhD at Goldsmiths and is a writer and artist whose research explores radical movements between digital materiality and the arts. He's also a feature and review writer for rhizome.org and further afield. Together, they are the brains behind the 3D Additivist Manifesto, which you'll learn more about tonight. And tomorrow, we're doing kind of a two-part workshop here in the studio with special guests X1 and Curve Case. And X1 is a global leader in additive manufacturing that specializes in 3D printing in metals, which is pretty amazing. And Curve Case is a local business started by CMU architecture alum Ben Sachs. You're welcome to join us from 10 to 12 in the morning with a roundtable between Morehshin, Daniel, X1, and Curve Case. And in the afternoon, we're doing a create session between 1 and 5:30. And if you'd like to join, talk to me or Tom Hughes at the end of this workshop, and we can get you signed up. We have a few spaces left. And with that, I'll hand it over to you guys. All right, thanks.
Thank you so much. And we just want to say thanks for having us too. It's amazing to be here. It's a real privilege to be invited by Lauren and Golan and everybody at the studio and Via Festival. So yeah, neither of us have been to Pittsburgh before, so we're going to make the most of it. You didn't have any dumplings, but I did, so forgive my digesting conversational approach to this presentation. So we're going to present our project in various means. There's a lot of material we want to get through. We're going to basically introduce our collaboration, how we started to work together. We're going to talk about some of the influences that went into us producing the manifesto and the forthcoming cookbook that we're going to be working on. And we're going to talk a little bit about each of our own work, our own research and our practices and how they kind of slot together. And we're also going to show the manifesto video kind of halfway in the middle of all this. Okay, are we good?
Yeah, and I just wanted to say hi and thank you to Lauren, to Golan, to the studio and Via Festival for having us. It's a pleasure.
So I'm a writer and researcher. I've been doing my PhD for 1 million years at Goldsmiths University. I'm interested in the boundary between the digital and the physical. I'm going to go on and talk a little bit about this. And I've kind of made a place for myself writing about new media, digital arts, basically, over the last few years. And this is how I came to meet Morehshin. I was asked to interview her for Rhizome. And I at that point, I didn't know very much about 3D printing. And I interviewed Morehshin about a project she's going to talk about now. And that's how our collaboration started, basically. So I suppose my interest in 3D printing also began with a project that I did with an artist called Alex Myers. And I won't talk too much about this, but we came to a point in the project where we decided to produce these 3D models. And we took this raw data that we'd scraped from audio files, and we converted it into these strange kind of sculptures. You see a human figure down in the bottom left there, and this kind of strange projecting out of them. And at this stage, I'm sure a lot of you who've worked in 3D printing, you get to the point where you place the 3D object in the software, and it will tell you that this is too complicated, we can't print it, it needs simplifying. All these red planes are basically planes that are impossible to reproduce in the printer. And I just became fascinated with this as a kind of metaphor for the limitations of being able to translate things on a computer, the digital into physical things. So this is kind of where my original kind of fascination with 3D printing came. And obviously, if you simplify this object, you end up with something like this, which is really underwhelming, I think. Okay, and if I talked about the project some more, it might make some more sense. But you have to simplify the surfaces, and this is what you get, this lump of plastic. Okay.
Okay, so as Lauren mentioned, I'm originally from Iran. I moved to the United States in 2007. So my background is in social science and media studies. That's what I studied at Tehran University for my bachelor's. Then when I moved to the US, I started to study digital media studies and new media art, and kind of been since then trying to bring together kind of like critical perspective to art and technology. I am really interested in this, I guess, more of poetic, feminine, emotional approach to technology. And these two things, design, function, and then art and aesthetic, is something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about in my practice. One thing that I usually tell everyone, about my work and what I'm interested in is that probably when you come from, the Middle East or a country like Iran, you don't have necessarily the privilege of working on a lot of projects that are only aesthetic. For me, art always meant something that had purpose, or in a way engaging political, social, cultural issues around me. Again, art activism is something that I connect with in my work, and I'm really interested in exploring more in depth. So one of the projects that I want to talk about, which is, as Daniel was mentioning, was kind of a starting point for the manifesto, is a project called Dark Matter, which I worked on from 2012 to 2014. And I was really interested. I remember I watched a video of a 3D printer printing something, and I was like really fascinated by that process. And one of the first things that I thought about was, wouldn't it be amazing if someone could 3D print something that is forbidden, right? Like in a country like Iran, what kind of that possibility, I guess, like what kind of opportunity it gives you when you live in a country like Iran. So I started doing a lot of research about kind of my relationship, or people's relationship in general, with objects or things that are forbidden or unwelcome. And as you can see in this picture, so, like dogs in Iran are kind of unwelcome and are forbidden. So you can walk your dog outside, but you can get a fine for it. I remember growing up in Iran and like having like the toy, any toy from Simpsons was something that was forbidden and unwelcome. Like the government actually closed down a bunch of stores. The same thing with Barbies. And satellite dishes, which everyone owns. My mom in the last, I think, 5 years probably had her satellite dish done like 4 times, but she just goes and buy a new one the day after. And that's how people function, it's just like this constant battle back and forth, and I was really interested in that. But I wanted to think about 3D printing as this like poetic tool for archiving and documenting some aspects of my life. And in this case, forbidden, unwelcome objects. And being really interested in how this, like thinking about something that is forbidden and then like standing back and looking at it and thinking about it, and what does it allow you to understand about historical dimension of this object, but also how ridiculous in general it is that these things are forbidden in a country like Iran, right? And what does it mean to think about this and go back to it in 30 years and think about it and gather this collection? So that's why I kind of like then was really interested in creating this kind of humorous juxtaposition between these objects that I would select, and then I would combine them. So the first one is a dog wearing a dildo with satellite dish. And then the second one is a Homer Simpson, Buddha. Again, Buddha being forbidden in Iran because or like unwelcome mostly by the government because it promotes other religion. Same thing with Barbie VHS, which I remember growing up in Iran. Like my parents, it was kind of a drug deal. My parents had to like get VHS by this guy who would bring it in like black plastic bag to our house, and ham or pig, and then gun. So then I expanded this project to other countries like Iran, including Iran, North Korea, and China, and Saudi Arabia. And that's kind of how our collaboration started with this project.
So, I mean, I was I was interviewing Morehshin for Rhizome, and I was really fascinated by the way that she managed to create these objects which embodied this notion of taboo, of the cultural limitations, but also managed to kind of supersede that. They combined the objects together. Homer's band, Buddha's band, but what is a Homer Buddha? What does it represent? And this very notion of the 3D printer as a technology that comes from these simple digital files that can kind of zip across borders and boundaries. Like you have to smuggle the VHS into Iran in a black paper bag, but you can email the form, the shape of it, and without any hassles. This was at the time as well that the 3D printed gun was getting a lot of press, and we were talking about this when we first met. As a kind of, we were kind of frustrated that this notion of radicality, the notion of the 3D printer as something which could kind of be a technology of freedom and liberation, was becoming clouded by this very simplistic notion of what radicality was, i.e. violence, i.e. something as symbolic as the gun to hurt people. But there's so much exciting, amazing 3D printed projects out there, and I suppose this is partly where our discussion began in terms of gathering some of these things together, bringing them together under one collective, and we got thinking about this.
Yeah, and another thing that we were interested in was how we wanted to take this very specific position toward 3D printers. I think at that time we had this conversation about how like everyone should stop ever 3D printing a fucking cube or whatever, which was like one of the things that everyone wanted to do first when they had access to a machine. And that we should think about this technology and what kind of influences it's having on at our present time, our contemporary life, but also in the coming years and in the future. So that's why we decided to write the manifesto also as part of first kind of having this position that we would come at, and then creating a cookbook, which we will talk about in a second. But I also want to talk briefly about some of the projects that we have been inspired by when we were having this conversation. This is an exhibition which was at Victoria and Albert Museum in 2014. And this was basically right after a lot of things that was happening in under the name of Arab Spring, so in the Middle East, and then Green Movement in Iran. And I think it was a very good and timely exhibition in terms of how we can fight against violence, how we can think about use these objects to fight against police brutality, against power. And this exhibition was the first exhibition, as they define it, that was examining the power role of objects in movements for social change and how political activism drives a wealth of design and collective creativity that defy standard definitions of art and design. And to us, a project like this was way more radical than the gun project, for example, because it was not just creating these objects that you can use to kill someone in the case of the gun, but also in the case of this exhibition, objects that you can modify, reappropriate in radical ways for let's say protest, to fight against a power or police.
And this comes to a project which comes out of Fat Lab and was actually produced by Golan Levin himself, sat at the back here, who you all know. This was a project which was hugely inspiring to our ideas of radicality and the kind of potential of the 3D printer. And for us, this project is really what we wanted to kind of touch on when we were gathering the wealth of 3D printed projects out there. So to really summarize this, and I don't want to undermine the Golan's own idea about what this project is, but basically, if you take all of these toys like Duplo, Lego, what's it called, the sticky out one? There's a whole load of toys. Sticker bricks are whack-a-macca. There's Tinker toys. Okay, Fat Lab created this kit of different combinations of these shapes that you could basically download off the internet and print out yourself on your own 3D printer, or you could create your own combinations. And this project really spoke to us in terms of the way that toys are a proprietary object. They are limited in their, Lego want to sell more Lego blocks. So they're not going to make the toy compatible with another company's toy, okay? And this is kind of symbolic of how capitalism functions, how the market functions, to close things off, to limit things. They want you to be creative, but they want you to create within the limited structure that they've developed and that they can sell you. And this really bypasses that. It opens up creativity, and it produces a space for radical alternative possibilities to emerge. Even though this is a toy, even though this is such a playful, day-to-day common thing, it really symbolically gestures to the possibility of the 3D printer to kind of open up and breach these boundaries between objects. So this was really hugely influential to us.
Yes, another project, a lot of you probably know about this because it went viral, but it's this project that a Japanese artist, first she was creating a plastic cast of her vagina, and then she got arrested, and then she started to do more projects of like 3D scanning her vagina and putting it, on an iPhone case, and then having the file online. But
This is in Japan, where a woman especially to talk about her vagina is seen as a huge taboo. It's not.
So that's kind of like I think that's what we were fascinated by, like how in a certain culture you can use this technology as a way to kind of fight against how your body should be defined, or the parts of your body that culturally are not acceptable for you to talk about. And we love that line that with her kind of like talking about casually, I guess, standing there saying I want my vagina to travel around the world. And it's something that we in a way connect with a lot, with how you can think about this technology in a way that is radical. And then this is another project. It was actually done by an artist who is, she did a residency at Pier 9 at Autodesk before I went there. But it's, as you can see there, it's a project called Becoming a Human 3D Printer. And she talks about how she's really fascinated by the process of 3D printing, but how she's also very interested in engaging with objects, with the process, that additive process, and the relationship of our bodies to that process. But one of the things she does, except for creating an army, human army of 3D printer, she's also interested in doing these live performances where she uses this laser guide that she has coded. So the laser follows the exact movement of a 3D printer for 3D printing a certain kind of object. And then she just follows that line and draws all these like objects as a live performance, which is really fascinating. And from all of these, we got to the idea of cookbook. It's something that we talked about. So, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have heard of the Anarchist Cookbook. This was a book that was produced by a guy called William Powell in the 1970s. And William Powell was quite young at this time. I don't think he'd even hit his 20s yet. He felt particularly disaffected by a lot of things that were going on in America at the time. I think reaction to the Vietnam War and various other things. And he decided that he wanted to create a book to empower people, to gather people's radicality together. So he went and sat in a library for a number of months, and he did lots of research, and he gathered together all of this information that was freely available in the library, and he placed it in one place. And of course, in this book, there are the designs to make pipe bombs from household objects. There's information in here how to hack vending machines to steal money out of them. There's some crazy stuff in here. And this book has been named in the court cases of many terrorist groups over the years. It's been found in the possession of these groups. But the question about this book really is whether you believe that William Powell's book caused these people to go out and to kill and to maim, or whether those people felt in their disaffection and need for something, and William Powell's book was there to fill that space. And that distinction between those two things, the kind of cause and effect of a radical turn, is something that really interests us, to kind of take the utopian idealism of something like William Powell, but to really base that on an idea about education, about the freedom of information, about liberating these ideas, giving people the tools and the power to express themselves.
And one last thing about this part is that we really wanted to ask difficult questions about this 3D printers, or in general, these like additive fabrication methods. But also we wanted to try to at least avoid binary thinking about this technology, whether like it's only dark or it's like really great and awesome. It's gonna change our life to become like this really great thing. But we wanted to find those blurry lines between them and play with those.
So I mean, so this is where the idea of the Additivist Cookbook kind of came from. There's so much great stuff out there already. We thought there was enough to create a book, but as you'll see, the more this project unfolded, the more we kind of gestured towards other things. Okay, so one of the things we started to do, we decided we were going to work together. We wanted to get this cookbook together. We wanted to write a text to call people to submit projects to us. So one thing we started to do is to look back at the 3D printer, to kind of deconstruct its elements, to create a sort of poetic language about what this technology is. We wanted to not just think about the 3D printer in terms of its utopian or dystopian inputs and outputs, but we really wanted to deconstruct its elements. So one of the major things, obviously, about the 3D printer is how crappy it is. Yeah, we've all seen this. I mean, this is a very simple 3D printer, yeah? But 3D printers fail. They are slow, they're cumbersome, they're smelly, the material is difficult to work with. It's not something that everybody can just pick up immediately and print whatever they want. You have to learn, you have to spend time, it's complicated, okay? But also the material most associated with 3D printing is plastic, of course. Although you can 3D print in a number of different materials, there is something inherent about the material of plastic which kind of offers up all of these metaphoric possibilities, okay? Plastic's malleability, its freedom of movement, the way that you can heat it up and set it and change it and reconstruct it. So we wanted to go back and kind of think about this poetics, kind of see if we can extract a politics out of these things. One way we did this is, I mean, this comes out of some of my own research, my PhD research. I don't know if many of you have heard of this idea of the Anthropocene. There's nodding heads, shaking heads, the Anthropocene. So the Anthropocene is a proposed name for a new geological era. And this hasn't been recognized yet, it's not defined, but in 2016, some of the world's leading geologists are going to come together and they're going to decide whether they are going to name a new geological era that is predicated on human activity. So if you go back through, if you cut into rock, you can kind of see in the background here, we've all seen this, you slice through the rock face. There's all these layers that go back millions and millions of years, and they can be traced and read by geologists to determine the chemical consistency of the atmosphere at certain times when huge catastrophic events have taken place. So there's all these geological eras named after great events that have happened in the very, very distant past, okay? So if there's a huge, if there's an asteroid comes and collides with the planet, throws up a lot of dust into the atmosphere, not only do you see that dust show up as a line in the rock, but you can also see associated with that dust layer the animals that died out. Suddenly there's a huge plethora of fossils of animals dying out and things like that. So the Anthropocene is an idea that the current era that we live in is one predicated on human activity. So our input on the planet is having a huge effect, and we are now going through one of the biggest extinction events that has ever been seen in the geological record. One of the ways that they are arguing they may define the Anthropocene, this has to be decided, is through the invention of plastics. Now, plastic is a strange material. It doesn't exist in nature, and yet suddenly, in the early 20th century, this material appears in the geological record, okay? Millions of years from now, there will be a marker in a line in the geological record made up of these tiny plastic components. They even have a new kind of rock called a plastiglomerate, and you find these things off the coast of Hawaii, which is an active volcanic island. And the crap, all the plastic that gets floated around in the ocean collects around Hawaii. And as the lava bubbles up from the ocean, from the bottom of the ocean, the plastic gets trapped in the rock as as it solidifies, and you get these things on the top there called a plastiglomerate. So we're having this crazy impact on our deep history, okay? So one way to think about plastic is to think about it in terms of deep time, okay? We've got the huge ancient past, okay? Plastic is a derivative of crude oil. Crude oil is made from ancient dead sea critters that sank to the bottom of the ocean millions of years ago. They were compressed into this black goo. We suck it out of the ocean. We separate it into its constituent parts. Some of them power our machines. Some things get extruded into plastic, okay? And then we turn our plastic into these amazing iPhone shoes, and we wear them to our party, and then we think they're not very comfortable. My friends didn't like them, so we chuck them onto the landfill. And 1 million years from now, when humans are extinct, the aliens will dig out the plastic shoes from the geological record. So plastic is inherently a technology of deep time, and this is something we wanted to kind of play on. Okay, so this is where we get a little bit of theory. This is the famous theorist, writer, philosopher, Donna Haraway. She's based in Santa Cruz University, has been for a number of years. Donna Haraway is fascinated at the moment by the notion of the Anthropocene. She argues that we shouldn't call it, this era that we live in, the Anthropocene. The anthropos, this idea of human-centeredness, is something which is kind of arrogant, and it centers everything back on the importance of humans. So she proposed this other idea called the Thulucene, or the Capitalocene. So the idea that capitalism is what is causing the processes of extinction and mass change on a grand scale. But she wants to, and has done in the past, created strange metaphysics and philosophies based around not just around humans, around women, different possibilities in terms of people of different gender and different race. But now she's coming up with metaphysics around non-human entities, around animals. And this metaphysics that she devised is around creatures that don't even yet exist, that have not even evolved to be on this planet yet. But her argument is that those animals, millions of years from now, that will evolve, have just as much right to exist as we do now. And they will live in the shadow of the world that we've created. Just as we live in the shadow of the world of those dinosaurs sinking to the bottom of the ocean, becoming crude oil, we live with that history as part of our lives. So the creatures of the future will exist as and they will incorporate our world within them. So if you go back to Donna Haraway's work in the 1980s, she wrote the very famous text, Manifesto for Cyborgs. This was hugely influential in the writing of our manifesto, where she reconstituted the figure of the cyborg, taking it as this kind of figure of high technology, a collaboration between humans and machines, this figure of war, essentially. And she reconstituted it as a metaphor for a new type of feminist figure, a figure that incorporated not just all different kinds of humans and women and beings, but also these beings could have technology incorporated within them. And she said very famously, "I would rather be a cyborg than a goddess." The idea of the goddess as the kind of mother goddess was too limited. It was too centered on a very limited idea of what it was to be free, to be a woman. The cyborg is much more dynamic, much more liberated, much more plastic, if you will. And this takes us up to the present day. There's been a whole host of feminist movements that came out of Donna Haraway's work in the 1980s. The cyber feminists, one of a big group of which was called the VNS Matrix group. They were working in the 1990s, very much of this kind of utopian idea that the internet was going to become a space where people could be who they wanted to be. We could free ourselves from the limitations of kind of our social strictures. On the internet, anything was possible. We now know that this has kind of become limited because the internet became co-opted again by the market that it originally seemed to work against. There's other movements, contemporary movements. This is a really amazing group called the Gynae Punk movement. On the bottom here, this is a group of women based in North Spain, in Catalan, and they use open source kind of hacker technologies to devise tools that give women the possibility of taking control of their own bodies and their own health. So in some countries, for instance, abortion is still illegal, and this creates a situation where women are kind of, they don't have a control over their bodies. They have to go and work with the state, work with the system, work with a certain set of regulations. The gynaepunk movement are using things like the 3D printer to create an educational platform so that women can kind of take back control of their own bodies. So a lot of these ideas we fed straight into the manifesto. We're going to show you the video in just a minute. One of the most maybe kind of overt, kind of aesthetic ways that this manifested itself is our collaboration with the artist Andrea Young. She's a sound artist currently based in LA. When we created the manifesto, we wanted it to have this voice that spoke, that had a kind of authority to it, but we also wanted to imbue that voice with a certain kind of irony and gesture to the history of manifestos. Manifestos tend to be dominated by a very sort of male patriarchal voice, and we wanted to break with that. So this figure of the cyborg comes into play. The way that you'll hear this, the way that Andrea played with my voice to change it from a male voice through different modulating forms, so it becomes female, it becomes machine, it goes back to male, it kind of blends between these different shapes. So to summarize really quickly, we came up with this term additivism, which is a combination of the term additive from additive manufacturing and activism. So for us, additivism is about all of these different kind of scales. We have a technology that produces things layer by layer on a small step-by-step no motions. We want to use that technology to affect grand changes, or at least to gesture to them, to talk about them. So additive and activism is a kind of activism that works at small scales to produce big effects. This is kind of one of the definitions we have of this term anyway.
And after, we're going to show you the video, and then after that, I will talk about mostly that side of political activism aspect of our manifesto and how it came together.
And if, by the way, if you want to tweet, if you use the hashtag additivism, you can tweet what we're doing now. If you search for that on Twitter, there's a whole load of strange things on there too.
Derived from petrochemicals boiled into being from the black oil of 1 trillion ancient bacterioles. The plastic used in 3D additive manufacturing is a metaphor before it has even been laid into shape. Its potential belies the complications of its history, that matter is the sum and prolongation of our ancestry, that creativity is brutal, sensual, rude, coarse, and cruel. We declare that the world's splendour has been enriched by a new beauty, the beauty of crap, kipple, and detritus. A planet crystallised with great plastic tendrils like serpents with pixelated breath. For a revolution that runs on disposable armaments is more desirable than the contents of Edward Snowden's briefcase, more breathtaking than the United Nations legislative series. There is nothing which our infatuated race would desire to see more than the fertile union between a man and an analytical engine. Yet humankind are the antediluvian prototypes of a far vaster creation. The whole of humankind can be understood as a biological medium, of which synthetic technology is but one modality. Thought and life both have been thoroughly dispersed on the winds of information. Our power and intelligence do not belong specifically to us, but to all matter. Our technologies are the sex organs of material speculation. Any attempt to understand these occurrences is blocked by our own anthropomorphism. In order to proceed, therefore, one has to birth post-human machines, a phantasmagoric and unrepresentable repertoire of actual re-embodiments of the most hybrid kinds. Additivism will be instrumental in accelerating the emergence and encounter with the radical outside. Additivism can emancipate us. Additivism will eradicate us. We want to encourage, interfere, and reverse engineer the possibilities encoded into the censored, the invisible, and the radical notion of the 3D printer itself. To endow the printer with the faculties of plastic, condensing imagination within material reality. The 3D print then becomes a symptom of a systemic malady, an aesthetics of exaptation, with the peculiar beauty to be found in reiteration, in making a mesh. This is where cruelty and creativity are reconciled, in the appropriation of all planetary matter to innovate on biological prototypes. From the purest thermoplastic, from the cleanest photopolymer and shiniest sintered metals, we propose to forge anarchy, revolt and distemper. Let us birth disarray from its digital chamber. To mobilize this entanglement, we propose a collective, one figured not only on the resolution of particular objects, but on the change those objects enable as instruments of revolution and systemic disintegration. Just as the printing press, radio, photocopier and modem were saturated with unintended affects, so we seek to express the potential encoded into every one of the 3D printer's gears. Just as a glitch can unresolve an image, so it can resolve something more post-human. Manifold systems, biological, political, computational, material. We call for planetary pixelization, using additivist technologies to corrupt the material unconscious. A call that goes on forever in virtue of this initial movement. We call not for passive, dead technologies, but rather for a gradual awakening of matter, the emergence, ultimately, of a new form of life. We call for the endless repenning of Additivist Manifestos, artistic speculations on matter and its digital destiny, texts on the Anthropocene, the Chutulucene, the Plasticene, designs, blueprints and instructions for 3D printing, tools of industrial espionage, tools for self-defense against armed assault, tools to disguise, tools to aid and disrupt surveillance, tools to raise and rebuild, objects beneficial in the promotion of protest and unrest, objects for sealing and detaining, torture devices, instruments of chastity and psychological derangement, sex machines, temporary autonomous drones, lab equipment used in the production of drugs, dietary supplements, DNA, photopolymers and thermoplastics, stem cells, nanoparticles, technical methods for the copying and dissemination of mass-produced components, artworks, all patented forms, the aura of individuals, corporations and governments, software for the encoding of messages inside 3D objects, methods for the decryption of messages hidden inside 3D objects, chemical ingredients for dissolving or catalyzing 3D objects, hacks, cracks and viruses for 3D print software, to avoid DRM, to introduce errors, glitches and fissures into 3D prints, methods for the reclamation and recycling of plastic, caught in oceanic gyres, lying dormant in landfills, developing nations, or the bodies of children. The enabling of biological and synthetic things to become each other's prostheses, including skeletal cabling, nervous system inserts, lenticular neural tubing, universal ports, interfaces, and orifices. Additivist and deletionist methods for exacting androgynous bodies included skin grafts, antlers, disposable exoskeletons, interspecies sex organs, von Neumann probes, and other cosmic contagions. Methods for binding 3D prints and the machines that produce them in quantum entanglement. Sacred items used during incantation and transcendence, including the private parts of gods and saints, idols, altars, Kwashikali, ectoplasm, Namtag stones, the production of further mimetic forms, not limited to vorpal blades, squirtles, energon, symmetriads, asymmetriads, capital, junk, love, alephs, those that from a long way off look like flies. Life exists only in action. There is no innovation that has not an aggressive character. We implore you, radicals, revolutionaries, activists, additivists, to distill your distemper into texts, templates, blueprints, glitches, forms, algorithms, and components. Creation must be a violent assault on the forces of matter, to extrude its shape and extract its raw potential. Having spilled from fissures fracked into Earth's deepest wells, the beyond now begs us to be moulded to its will, and we shall drink every drop as entropic expenditure, and reify every accursed dream through algorithmic excess. For only additivism can accelerate us to an aftermath, whence all matter has mutated into the clarity of plastic.
Okay, so
Thank you. It's nice to hear people giggling behind you. That's exactly the response that we wanted.
During the time that we were working on the text for the manifesto and then thinking about the cookbook, I was working on all these ideas around connecting techno-capitalism, jihad, 3D printing, and plastic. I was reading this book by an Iranian philosopher. His name is Reza Negarstani, and there's this book you can see up there, Cyclopedia, Complexity with Anonymous Material. And I was really inspired by his approach to bringing together all these ideas around techno-capitalism and jihad. So it's a first Middle Eastern really book written that brings horror and science fiction together. It's kind of like a theory fiction. And I was really interested in these ways of connecting that to the work I was doing and the research we were doing for the manifesto, which is when you use a 3D printer, the plastic, Daniel talked about this, that is used in a 3D printer, right? Like that plastic comes from crude oil, and connecting that to all these ideas, again, like poetic, symbolic, metaphoric ideas around jihad and techno-capitalism. So I was inspired by Negarstani's introduction of jihad as the pole against which techno-capitalism rages, where he draws occupying forces into urban environments, resulting in cities being torn apart, reduced to dust. And rather than basically wishing the war machines of the US military to leave the Middle East, he says that extreme Islamists guiding principle is to keep the US war machines ever destroying idols, returning everything back to the desert, which he calls desertification. So the war on terror then is the opposite side of the same coin of objective politics. Jihad needs the war on terror, oil flows through both, guiding both. And this is the research that I was doing kind of like came at the same time that we were writing almost at the end of the text, but at the same time I was doing a residency at Pier 9 Autodesk. And this is when that video of ISIS destroying the artifacts went viral. That was at the end of January. And there were a lot of people, talking about it, but like a lot of people also like asking if I had like a certain kind of comment about it. And I think one thing that I found really fascinating with that was this idea of how ISIS, basically number one income is oil, right? And 1 year ago, or I think almost 2 years ago, US had this plan of bombing these pipelines in Syria as a way to cut down the funding that basically ISIS had from crude oil, but from oil in general. But at the same time, we all know that oil also plays a really important role in the West, in the economy of the West, but also there's the whole like petropolitics around it, right? So I was working on all these ideas, and there was a point that it just like felt like a really right moment to think about a way to respond to this project. And it's kind of, to me, it's a continuum of also the dark matter project that I was doing, which was finding ways using 3D printers as poetic and, in this case, practical way of archiving and documenting. So I was like, well, this is exciting. I can actually maybe find a way to 3D model, reconstruct like these artifacts that were lost digitally, and then 3D print them. And once I started this research, I had no idea how complicated the whole research aspect of the project is going to be, because I thought, well, obviously Mosul Museum, where these artifacts were destroyed at, the video that went viral, it was in Mosul Museum. They're gonna have a catalog, right? And then I started just contacting these different people, and then figured out there's no catalog at Mosul Museum for any of these artifacts. And in general, I think a lot of like cultural heritage institutions in the Middle East have done a really poor job of documenting these kind of artifacts. So I started contacting a lot of people, from British Museum who never responded, to like all these like other institutions. Like I was working with these 2 archaeologists in Iran who were helping me to find information about these objects, about the history of them, which one was like more important to like work on. And I was doing research in Persian, in Arabic, and in English, and finding very little information out there, which was pretty amazing and sad. So I came across this blog in the middle of my research, which kind of saved my life and a lot of my research, which was by a PhD student, Christopher Jones, who is doing his PhD specifically focused on Hatra and Assyrian time, which is the era that a lot of the artifacts that were destroyed at Mosul Museum were from. And he did this amazing job of going through like the video frame by frame and kind of talking about some of the artifacts that he could find information about, and documenting them and sharing information. But still, there were a lot of information that wouldn't match from the Arabic text that I was looking at, from the text that I was found in Farsi, and then the English version of them. So then it became about which one of these information are reliable and which one I should trust more. Another thing that was like a really common issue or like common dialogue around the loss of this object was that, well, a lot of these things are duplicates. An article came out that talked about most of them being duplicates, which is not true in the research that I've done. Many of them were original. So these identifying the original artifacts, and then which one were historically important, and also kind of finding some, or like choosing the ones that I could connect with personally. So to me, certain objects that I chose to work with have like this like really beautiful and poetic gesture. Like that one is like King Uthal, who is holding his hand up. It's kind of like this hello or goodbye gesture. So I wanted to also find this like emotional aspect of the project that I could connect with. And obviously the history of Iran and Iraq being a shared history where, 3,000 years ago, like all of these were part of the same era. I did a lot of research. I started to use this software called 123D Catch or Memento. I thought that it would be possible to use this software. How many of you have heard about 123D Catch? Okay, so, and then Memento, which is this newer software that Autodesk is developing. And I thought it would be possible to just gather images and use them, these like 2D images, and create 3D models. And once again, I was in the middle of the research, I figured out that is basically impossible because of the lack of images. And to, for example, to use 123D Catch or Memento, you need at least 25 images from different directions and kind of high quality, which was not available. Like the most images I found from these artifacts were around 3 or 4. So then I moved to a next plan, which was modeling these artifacts. So I gathered, a team of friends and colleagues and people who were interested in, and we modeled these artifacts back and forth. And so far, we finished 4 of them. And then I 3D printed them. And then, as I mentioned, because a very important aspect of this project was the research side, which I spent like 4 months on, only to figure out details about the artifacts, I wanted to find a way to integrate that in the project. And inside the artifacts, there are flash memories and flash drives that are sealed inside, and that all the research that so far I've done are included in it, including the STL file, which is the printable file that people later can have access to. But I also wanted to think about this project as not just necessarily as like a radical way to resist this or to respond to loss or like what ISIS was trying to do, but also as a way that I would find or keep this information for the future civilizations, at the same time finding a way that I could share them with the present civilizations. And that for that version of the project, I'm going to release the 3D printer files and the information online. And one question that I always get is that, so do you have to destroy the artifact to like get into these objects? And no, so I came up with this whole like process of like sealing, where with a sharp knife or object you can actually like cut around this like plug and then pull it out, and then you can have access to the flash memory cards and the flash memories. So these are some of the ones I have so far. And I talked about this already, information that are inside, from PDF files to maps to images, etc. And this is the, right now, I finally have access to 2 of the former staff of Mosul Museum that I'm directly working with, because this project has gotten like a lot of like, I guess like attention that has helped me actually to find the right people to work with. It was like really challenging to find these people because they've left Iraq, they're not there anymore. And I'm working with them to figure out what's next for this project. And I think one of the things that I really want to also focus on are the female figures or artifacts that were lost. And I think there's so much there also to think about, again, both poetically, metaphorically, and about the destruction of these artifacts.
Thank you so much, Morehshin and Daniel. Those of you who need to get going should get going to your 6:30 classes, but they have some time now for some Q&A. Also, if you can't make Q&A right now, they're actually around here, as they hinted, as artists in residence in the Studio for Creative Inquiry for the next week, working on the Additivist Manifesto. I know I've personally pinged about a half dozen students who will be working closely with them here in the studio, so please feel free to come by during the week or even right now. Thank you so much, Morehshin and Daniel, and to the VIA Festival for being our partners.
Yeah. Thank you.
So we'd love your questions if you have any. I'm sure there's a few. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a conversation that we've been actually having back and forth, especially about submissions at the cookbook, right? Because right now, 3D printers, I just actually got an email from this 3D printing shop in Lebanon who want to like do some collaboration, but we are really seeing that gap, right, in general, like in terms of both like critical understanding of 3D printers, but also access to this technology. And although I'm from Iran and I'm still connected to a lot of people and I know a lot of artists, we really haven't found that many projects that, could be like submitted for the cookbook, or people who are doing kind of critical 3D printing projects. So we think we still have, some work to do in terms of making it less just like Western submission cookbook, or like where this technology is available. So it's an important conversation to have and to keep in mind. And I think one of the things that we think about the cookbook is it's not a project that we're just gonna create and just like it will end and that's it. I think we're just gonna continue to expand it and add to it. And hopefully through time, in like 2 years, we will have more submissions from other places.
I think like any technology,
any
it will be
technology.
taken up by capital, because I mean that's how capitalism functions. It finds a gap is discovered by creators, by new technologies, and that becomes first a place for play, a place for expression, a place for radical things to take place, and then eventually that becomes then co-opted by the system. I mean that's a gross generalization of what takes place, but of course that's going to take place with a 3D printer and has taken place. The map that you talked about, I only saw this recently, but I thought it was super interesting. It's basically a world map, and it's a map of all of the libraries around the world that have 3D printers in them. They're accessible. But actually what you find is that the map is very America-centric, it's very Europe-centric. There's a few in Australia, there's like one in the middle of, there's one in Hawaii, there's like one dotted in the middle of Asia somewhere. And it's almost like that map also is a map of lots of other ways that power functions, and the 3D printer is at the moment very Western-centric technology, but the way that we talk about its possibilities, its freedom, its openness is we want to give power to people. We want to bypass infrastructures of energy and what's the word? Yeah, my brain's gone. but it's going to take a while for that to happen. And as we said right at the beginning, it needs the technology needs that software liberation to occur as well. So we don't just want to think about this on a technical from a technical point of view. Somebody will come along and create an amazing bit of software that allows people without much training to use 3D printers and create amazing things, and that's going to take a step by step. To get there, so we're interested to see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually, it is a really good question, because when I was like trying to make a decision of like, okay, in 30 years, like what would be the most accessible technology in terms of like storage, right? So what I found out is like that memory cards are going to be more accessible in terms of like revisiting and reusing because of their hardware, right? But at the same time, I was like, okay, whatever, I'm not gonna risk it. I'm gonna put a memory card and a flash drive both inside the artifacts as a way to like hopefully at some point in 30 years, there will be like a way to have access to it. Yeah, that's a really good point. Like as I'm not just like the information, like one thing that I wanna do is as I continue this research, I will update also the information that will go inside the body of these artifacts, because again, now I suddenly have access to former staff of Mosul Museum. But also I think it's important to kind of keep that in mind as like, okay, maybe there are objects that I can include something else in them in terms of like using it as a storage. So it would be nice to play with that.
There's a spin-off thing from that I've been thinking about a lot, and we didn't talk about it, but there's an amazing project that was done at Autodesk as well, where do you remember her name, the record artist?
Yeah, Anita like something.
Anita Gacy, I think it is.
Yeah.
And she devised a way to print vinyl records with playable music. It got quite a lot of press. You might have seen this. I mean, this is an incredibly complicated process to take digital music information, which is like zeros and ones, and then convert it into a form which can be additively produced by the machine and then can be read by a needle on a vinyl record. It's like the layers of that are super complicated. And at the moment, the resolution is not quite there to produce a very good recording. So if you play this record, it's really distant and kind of crappy and cackling, crackly. But I really love this idea that of plastic and its ability to store information. The vinyl record is an amazing technology. And one of the articles that was hugely influential on us writing the manifesto, it was in the New Scientist magazine about a year ago, This is where we got the term the plasticine, and it was essentially a scientific article about the influence of plastic on nature. And at the very end, it has this beautiful speculative paragraph, and it talks about how there's this particular fossil that they found from millions of years ago. And by examining this fossil, they figured out that there's these kind of waves on the back of this creature, and they realized that this was like a fine sort of fur that existed on the back of the creature under the sea, and it would wave this thing and create kind of patterns and communicate with people, with other creatures or whatever. But these spines are so fine, and yet they've managed to survive millions of years in this rock form. Yeah, that then she speculates, what if millions of years from now, the vinyl record has become fossilized, has become what they call a pseudomorph, where the minerals leach in and change the plastic into a new form. So then the idea is, 10 million years from now, whatever it is, a million years, aliens land on the planet, dig out this rock thing with all these strange grooves in it, and figure out that this was a technology that stored encoded music, and then they can play, the Beatles or whatever it is.
Also, like as a material to make art, I just recently we were doing an interview with Claudia Hart, and she said something really interesting. She was like, I just want to work with plastic. I want all of my stuff to be in plastic because it will last for millions of years. No one can get rid of my artwork, which was, a very smart way to think about it. But it was like a joke, but I think that's interesting to also think about plastic as this material that will, ABS at least, plastic, right, that will stay for a long time, millions of years, never goes away.
What will remain of us? It'll be plastic cups, and it'll be Beatles records. This is what's going to last of the human civilization.
It's the end.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think back to your first question, which kind of like relates, I think, in a way to your second question, that we have been thinking about the whole, like, first of all, the word additive, right, fabrication method, is just like one way of thinking about technologies, and we're not interested necessarily only in it. And we will talk about this a little bit more tomorrow in the first 1 hour of our workshop. But we're not interested in it only as this like method for creating something like layer by layer, but as a concept, right? Like we just talked about crude oil, we talked about layer of like, right, like plastic also inside like these stone or whatever, like all these examples that Daniel gave. So we're really interested as this concept that you can expand and think about it not just as a method, but also as a poetic concept. And then we are, I think that is possible. It is possible that a technology like 3D printers never become accessible to public in a way that we imagine them. I actually, like, this is a conversation that I was having with a colleague at Autodesk, who that's kind of what he specializes on, and he was saying that he didn't think that it will not be easy to make this technology a technology that, like everyone can have a 3D printer at their homes and they can use it, because it's so complicated, not just the software, but just the fact that if you want to 3D print part of your coffee machine that is broken, you don't want to go through that whole process of like dealing with the printers and errors and then removing support material. It just doesn't make sense for the way that general public think about consumption and like using something as a easy, fast way to create something else, right? So I actually don't think at this point it's possible to really make that happen unless like something radically changes with the process of how 3D printers work, which I think could be interesting. Right now at Autodesk, they're developing these printers. They're called Ember printers, and they, like, the method is completely different. So with like a lot of 3D printers, or most of 3D printers, the head moves, right? And then like it creates like layer by layer. And then the printer they're developing, the base moves. And so the head is just stable. And then in the base, there's like resin liquid. And then the base moves and then it creates. You probably have seen like a video of it, like the object, it's like a time lapse, right? The object like this comes out from this like liquid. So yeah, they're experimenting with a lot of different methods. And tomorrow, actually, X1 will talk about a lot of that with material, which I think could be interesting. But I don't know. Go on if you want
No,
to say.
I mean the metaphor side of it is super interesting, and it's something maybe we should have gestured to. I mean, technologies in and of themselves have always then been co-opted by our language and our metaphors. So if you think about the way that we think about thought and the mind, if you go back to the time that Freud was writing about the mind, he used the metaphor of pistons pumping liquids around the brain, like pumping kind of thoughts around. And then a bit later, the printing press might have been used as a metaphor. And now we think about the brain and we talk about it through computers. So one of the things as well we wanted to gesture to was the way that 3D printers and the technologies that will evolve out of 3D printers, they will be co-opted by our language and our ways of thinking. Like I've said a lot of times that if we'd have been around in the 1970s, we probably would have written a manifesto for the photocopier, because that would have, to us at the time, felt like the most radical potential technology. And that sounds crazy and mundane now in some ways, but if you think back to what the photocopier did, it was a business technology that was able to produce large-scale, cheap copies of business documents or whatever. Eventually, they were on the high street, and people used them to make their punk zines. People used them to make their mail out and to ship it all around the world. That technology was not liberated until artists, until radicals got hold of it and did something with it to turn it into a radical technology. So it's what you do with this, and it's how you think of its possibilities and how you open that up that something becomes radical. So there's so many possibilities for the 3D printer, and so many that we'll never ever see them come to fruition, but it's fun to kind of speculate on that a little bit. Maybe that would be good. More weirdos. Give all weirdos 3D printers.
Yeah, I would be happy with that.
Any other questions, thoughts, criticisms? Yeah.
I think both. I would say both. I mean, in my work, like, I just find, like, my whole like perspective to this project is that everything is like so fucked up around us, and like let's just not just environment, because I think that's still a very like first world country issue, in a way, not just issue but something that people are talking about, right? But like in Syria, no one is thinking about environment right now, right? But I just, my whole thing with it is that like there's so much fucked upness around us, and to me, like one way to deal with it is through irony that is smart, that yes, points out to all these things, but then at the same time you can or you can laugh about it, right? I mean, humor is something that I found like really helpful in a way that I've approached like several projects, but as a way to, yes, this is a serious problem, but I mean, that is also, I think is a good comedy, right? Good comedy can talk about serious issues, but you can also, right? Like that's that, but in a good way. Like if you're smart about it and you can do it well, I think it can come off as an interesting way to present a problem. So to me, that's something that I think about a lot. And my joke is that I have way less depressed friends who are from Iran. It's true though, like you just like learn how to just be like, yes, this is fucked up, but I'm not gonna just like sit here and cry for it, right? I think that's an interesting way to deal with it.
I think humor shocks people into thinking in a different way as well. The world that we sort of propose in the video, it becomes more and more bleak to the point where we're proposing the plastication of everything, you know? And that's difficult to deal with, but these issues are things that we need to think about, and the solutions are ones that we're not ever going to be ready to come up with. And again, the humor in that list, the way that it trails off, it starts off with things that you might consider to be radical, and then it gets weirder and weirder to the point where it's almost like the list itself kind of breaks down, and it's gesturing to possibilities that a list can never gain, you know, an endless list, a list that goes on. So yeah, I mean, humor's something inherent in a lot of the projects we've received as well. And I don't know why that is. I mean, it's like, I just think that maybe when artists come up to a new tool and they go, wow, this is cool, I'm going to do exciting, expressive things, humor can become the vehicle for a critical position, and it can carry that critical position to a wider audience than it necessarily would do if it was delivered dryly and systematically. So yeah, I mean, I hope that the cookbook eventually will be a serious text. We really do want this to provoke discussions around these notions of kind of mass extinction and the environment. And if next year the geologists come together and they decide to mark the Anthropocene in a way that's not related to our current state, whether it's plastic or waste or whatever, one of the ways they might mark it is when we first started burning fires, 10,000 years ago, or we first started burning fossil fuels. That might be the marker that they use. And I think that's a mistake, because I don't think that those things feel now enough. Plastic is symbolically very much of the present day, and those geologists, whatever they decide, will be headline news. It will travel around the world and it will promote discussion. So we're trying to hijack that too a little bit, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully a cookbook will be a combination of ironic submissions and serious submissions and practical things, and I think that would be perfect.
And impossible things.
Yes,
hopefully.
impossible, beyond imagination.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the most articles that has been written about this piece is this article that its title is "Spread What Has Been Lost, Spread What Has Been Destroyed." And I really like that idea of, and that's why I think it's important for me to not keep the artifacts or the STL files or the information about them just for the future, because I think if you can spread this, the whole idea of destroying these artifacts was about destroying part of history, was about power, was about putting out a show that we can do this and we're going to go do this and we're going to just destroy these idols that are against our beliefs or whatever. So I think having access to these files that, obviously they're not accurate. I'm not trying to replace these artifacts. At least I don't claim that, right? But it's a way to be able to reference back, to what existed, or the lack of information about them is something that I found really sad. So hopefully that will fill in all these gaps in a way, as an art project that has both these political and poetic and practical aspects to it.
There's a great project by Oliver Larrick, who many of you might know. He did the video series called Versions, which is a great video series. But I can't remember the museum, but he was given access to the archives of a particular museum, and they had 3D scanned a lot of their artifacts, and he was allowed to do whatever he wanted with those, which is kind of amazing. Mm-hmm. And he essentially created this amazing website where you can go and explore the shapes and look at them, and you can download them and do with them what you want. But what's happened off the back of that, which no one could predict, is that video game designers who are trying to make interesting environments to run around and shoot people in the face, they took some of those objects and put them in the background of their game. So you have this real world museum object that's been copied for the purposes of saving it, for educational purposes, and now it's in the background. No one's noticing as they run around, strafing around the 12-year-old boy that they're playing with on their Xbox. And I really love that gesture, that these objects kind of now are saved for posterity in a way that no one could ever have imagined, 1,000 years ago, 100 years ago, whatever. I love that. And I love that in Morehshin's work as well. Whatever happens to these objects, who knows? But that is just as valuable and just as important to their existence.
Yeah, I mean, I would prefer that to these objects never being known in history, because I think to me the most disturbing part of that whole thing with ISIS was the loss of these objects. So if that replaces these objects becoming kitsch or too popular, I find that more important than them being lost, So I think a way to keep it alive, at least, if these objects exist only in one museum, I think, well, yes, that's one way to represent it. But I do find it important that giving access or this opening it up to public to do what they want with it. So I think I'm gonna open up maybe first publish 2 of them just to see the response, and then from there decide about do I publish all of them or not. But also the one last thing that I just wanted to say, one thing that I've been thinking a lot about this project is there are all these companies, many of them based in San Francisco, that now go all over the world and take their 3D scanners with them, and then go to the Middle East and they 3D scan all these like artifacts in histories. And I've been thinking a lot about this idea of colonialism and 3D scanners. Like, what does that mean? Like, who is owning these things? Who is archiving them? And where does these like STL files or like scan of these objects are going? And will in like 10 years this will be the new way of colonizing what is like these like artifacts in the Middle East, right? Like, you go to like a whatever Dallas Museum of Art, and it's this like door from a Buddhist temple in wherever, and then you're like, how did you guys get this whole door? Like, it's the half of a building, you know? And that, to me, that is the scary side of it. That, I don't know, we'll see in 10 years.
With that, I'd like to say thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you for
It was
having us.
wonderful.
And thank you for your questions.